Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us for the 2021 East Carolina University Jazz Festival, named in the honor of Dr. Billy Taylor, sponsored by East Carolina University and the College of Fine Arts and the Jazz Studies Program School of Music. And that was all jumbled up, but that's what it is. We're down here in the woods, so we want you to enjoy and have a good time. We are very fortunate to have two distinguished guests with us today. We're so excited to have them. They have been with us in person several times in the past, and now they're here with us virtually. And but their spirits are so incredible that they're with us always in the present and in real time. So we just love them to death, and we're really excited about them being here. Just before we start this conversation and this discussion, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can keep yourselves muted until you're ready to ask a question, if you'd like to ask a question or if you want to speak, that way that'll keep some of the background noise out. We have Rachel Howard and Andrew Falacara as administrators with the presentation tonight, and Alex Davis, our wizard of technology, is running things, and we're excited to have them all with us. This year's festival has been challenging to put together because we're bringing so many different components together. We started off the week with 5 jazz recitals on Sunday, and then we moved into our B-Band concert directed by Professor Dan Davis, and the B-Band did an outstanding job. Backing up briefly with the recitals that we had, we're actually furloughing 5 people, and graduate level as well as undergraduate level, and they did an outstanding job. Last Saturday, we actually recorded our portion of the concert, which is going to air tonight at 8 p.m. And the featured artist on the performing aspect of it is what's that trumpet player's name? Any guys in the band? That was just to make sure you were awake. Anybody want to just shout out his name? Your grades really depend on it. Oh,
Sean
that
Jones.
means I just go down and hit F. Mr.
Let me help him, Sean Jones.
Mr. Sean Jones, ladies and gentlemen, will be performing on the concert, and so I just hit F's all the way down on my roll. That's good. Okay, that makes it real easy, Dan. You know, so you can do the same thing because there's some B-band players on here too. So that's good. But
Plus
that concert,
minus minus.
yes, absolutely. And that concert will air at 8 p.m. And we hope you tune in and check that out. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to open this up as a discussion. Anything is on the table as far as the music, the life of jazz musicians, the lives of these distinguished gentlemen, the people that they've performed with, what it's like being on the road, anything that you can think of, they're more than willing to answer. And I can tell you, 2 of the most recorded musicians ever: jazz educators, pianist, drummer, composers, arrangers, but more importantly, just distinguished and great gentlemen. So please, everybody, let's welcome Carl Allen and Benny Green. And Carl and Benny, I'm really just going to open the floor, man, for you guys. Everyone has done the research on you guys, and just want you just say anything that you would like to about yourselves, and then we're just going to open it up for discussion, and we'll just go from there.
I'll go second.
Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. And I met Professor Dashiell originally through the great Bobby Watson, alto saxophonist, composer, band leader. And we just hit it off from the beginning. The way musicians are able to interact off the bandstand becomes reflected in the music. So Carol, so much instant brotherhood. So we go back a long ways, and it's always it's always a good heart connection for me when I'm with him. And then I met Professor Allen, I guess probably 1982, if not 83. I want to say 82. And I think the first time we played together was with his brother, trumpet player Eddie Allen, E.J. Allen, if I'm not mistaken, at a club which is now defunct in New York called Lush Life. And so Carl and I go back a long, long ways. And what I would like to do, and I believe just from the little that Professor Dashiell and I have talked about, we would like to spend this time together with you, if I can speak in the collective, and just help maybe connect in a cross-generational sense, because what's really kept the music, the Black American art form that's been called jazz, that's known as jazz, what's kept it strong and thriving and growing has been a cross-generational connection. So in this challenge times that we're in right now, a lot of isolation and seeming separation, it's more important than ever before that we connect. So, there's often a tendency in young folks in any generation to kind of band together with their peers. And that's important. That's a part of the music. But what we hope to have happen today, again, if I can speak in the collective, is to hear from you folks, to hear from you students about what's on your minds, what some of your interests are, and what some of your challenges are in the present. Because what I've found with students is that if individuals will be brave and forthcoming in just speaking up and asking questions, our concerns are really not individual ones, they're quite universal. And so rather than have our forum here be like the older guys lecturing at you, it would be really great if we can hear from you about what's on your mind and, kind of mix it up from there.
Cool. Sounds good. It's good. Carl?
Well, yeah, so it's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to just, from speaking with a number of musicians over the past 13 months or so, it seems like many people are kind of on the same page in terms of their concerns and fears. And when I ask a lot of younger musicians how many people are kind of frightened by the pandemic in terms of the outcome and what it means and how it will impact our lives and our careers, and I think most people raise their hand to that question. But I'll tell you, it certainly frightened me, and it was very personal for me because tomorrow, exactly 1 year ago, at 10:12 a.m., we got a call, we, being my wife and I, that she had tested positive for COVID. And it just shook my world up. And fortunately, she was fine. I mean, she took 2 weeks to kind of quarantine, and then she was cool, so it wasn't that severe. But the point is that it put me in a place where it scared me, and we didn't know what that meant because it was still kind of new, and aside from the fact that by that point several months of work had been canceled and all of that. But I made a decision shortly after that, and that decision was whatever this is and wherever it takes us, that I would like, what is it that I can control? And I started thinking about how for the past 30 plus years I'm always bemoaning about what I didn't have time to do. and I really said, well, COVID has given us, if nothing else, time. And so I used that time to kind of reflect and use this time as a reset. And I always say that even in the darkest hours, there's still some blessings. And so for me personally, it allowed me to take better care of myself and, started walking. And I was walking up to about 8 miles a day at one point, and just resting and sleeping and reading books and watching just normal stuff. But then I use it again as a reset. And so I say this in context as hopefully as encouragement for a lot of young people that whatever it is you're feeling, you're not alone. But I see this in an interesting way. As we were coming up, it was like you had to, when you were coming along, you had to play with certain people before you play with other people. You got to play certain clubs before you play other clubs, etc. The whole process of paying dues. And a lot of that just doesn't exist anymore. So I say that to say for the young musicians, this is an opportunity really for you to um, try to cement your feet in this culture. If this is something you really want to do, because it's like so many of us are all doing the same thing. We're all at home and whatever. But if you this is something you want to do, this is the time where you can practice, where you can write, where you can transcribe, and you can do all sorts of things because we don't have as many distractions. And I think this time has given us that gift to be able to just sit still for a minute. So, again, I look at it as there's some a positive time for us. Otherwise, if not, if you don't have a plan, you'll sit on the couch and watch TV all day, which I don't recommend. But it is an opportunity for us to kind of reconnect with ourselves and reconnect with others, and as one of my mentors says, we don't grow in isolation, we grow in community. So the question becomes, what community are you going to choose to be a part of? Because not every community is for you. So, but if we use this time, I think we can. Those are some things that I think we can use to our advantage to become. Those are some things that I think we can use to our advantage to become better.
It's very, very cool. Uh, having met both of you gentlemen, many years ago and fellowshipping in many different situations, can you talk a little bit about some of the musical experiences that, I know you guys have played with everybody on this Who's Who's list of jazz luminaries, but can you talk about some of the experiences that stand out to you guys?
Oh, gee, uh, I'm sure it's a matter of how much time we should take to talk about that, because uh, I've had so much mentorship, beginning from my childhood. I grew up in Berkeley, California. It's my hometown. It's where I'm speaking to you from now. And beginning with my father, who played the tenor saxophone, and he was listening to jazz records. He was listening to Thelonious Monk and Charlie Parker records. And so he was the first person to introduce me to the music. And I grew up in a school system here in Berkeley in the 1970s, which was probably about the most liberated time and place this land has seen since it's been called the United States. And we had an actual jazz department beginning at the fourth grade level, going all the way up through high school. So kids could actually get acclimated with playing the blues and doing what's been called improvisation. And we actually had a teacher, a man who passed some years ago named Phil Hardiman, who mentored us. So I grew up around a lot of cultural inclusion and a really conscious, intentional embrace of Black excellence here in Berkeley and in the Bay Area in general in the 1970s. So I was born in New York City, although I grew up here, but I moved back to New York at the age of 19 in 1982 because I had a very specific aspiration. I wanted to become a jazz messenger, which meant playing and being an active member of Art Blakey's group, Art Blakey and the Jazz. I had this drive and passion when I moved to New York, and I had a background of a lot of people that had helped me, a lot of older musicians who had mentored me here in the Bay Area, notably Dr. Eddie Henderson, great trumpeter. And so when I moved to New York, I wanted to go hear the Jazz Messengers as much as possible, and that was sort of my objective. And things really came on quickly for me. I became a house pianist at a club called the Jazz Forum, where a lot of musicians would come through, and I got to meet some members of the Jazz Messengers at that time. Terrence Blanchard and Art Blakey's pianist at the time, wonderful musician named Johnny O'Neill. So Johnny befriended me, and he introduced me to Art Blakey, who just looked, and he said, "You need more," because he could tell I was very green. Because he could tell I was very green. But within a few months, I'd been practicing along with his records and going to hear the band all the time, sneaking my tape recorder into the shows, recording the shows, and practicing along during my daytime hours with recordings of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, because I was very serious about doing this thing. So within a matter of months, I got to actually sit in with Art Blakey, and I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of accompaniment, what we call comping, but I knew the music. And Art dug me, and he said, "Keep doing what you're doing. I'm gonna need you one day." And that was all the push I needed. Within a few months of that, the late great vocalist Betty Carter heard me, and she invited me to audition for her band. And at the audition, she hired me. And playing with Betty became my first traveling gig, which I did for 4 years, from April of 1983 until April of 1987, when Art Blakey finally offered me the job. So I just want to mention to you young folks, if you have an aspiration to play in a certain band or with a certain band leader, it might be a demanding band leader that we played in all tempos and all keys, and she was very adept at scoping out your strengths and weaknesses and your cliches, and she would call you on it. If she heard you play something twice, she'd say, "I heard that before, give me something else." She'd say it on the bandstand in front of the audience. And so she trained us to be in the moment. But once I started playing with Art Blakey, it's a completely different personality and a different instrumental setting, where I'd been playing for a vocalist with a rhythm section of piano, bass, and drums. Now we had several horns, and Art Blakey's dynamic and propulsive energy to work with. But all these different characters from the soloist. So fast forwarding from my time with Art Blakey, I had a chance to play with the man who's arguably the greatest trumpet player in the world for at least 30 years. Some would say, certainly one of the greatest of all time in the music and to ever touch the instrument, the great Freddie Hubbard. And Professor Allen was instrumental in bringing me into the band. I'd met Freddie while I was playing with Art Blakey, and Freddie himself is an alumni of the Jazz Messengers. So Freddie had been interested in me, but it was actually Professor Allen who asked shortly after Art Blakey had let me go after 2.5 years on a record, if I was still playing with Art. And I told him I wasn't. He got in touch with Freddie and fired me right away. And that was a whole new experience for me. I can say each one of these bands gave me a foundation for the next, and yet each band leader had a highly unique personality. So Freddie inspired me and challenged me immensely. From there, I began playing with the great Ray Brown, the hardest swinging bassist in the history of the music. I'll say it. And I had my longest tenure with Ray of all my experiences as a sideman. I played with Ray for 4.5 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself because while I was playing with Freddie, and Carl Allen was the drummer, eventually, very young Christian McBride, who was maybe about 18 years old at the time, began playing in the band. And it felt so good playing with Christian and Carl that for the first time, I was really motivated to have my own band. I hadn't been before. All I really wanted was to play with Art Blakey. I didn't really think about being a band leader, but it felt so good playing with them. And I had recently been signed to Blue Note Records, and I didn't go after the record contract. It just happened to me because Art Blakey was known to be a great talent scout. And so record executives would come to hear the Jazz Messengers, to hear the new talent. So Bruce Lundvall, who was the president of Blue Note Records at the time, just came down to the club we were playing in New York, Sweet Basil, heard me, gave me his business card and said, let's make a record. So I'd been signed to Blue Note and I had a chance to record with Christian and Carl and tour with them. And that was sort of my moment in the industry, if you will, during the 90s. And I've learned over time that some things can happen when someone who got into the music because they love it gets signed to a corporate label. A lot of things can happen to your perspective and your priorities and your attitude and your focus. Because sure enough, while I was always in the music for the music's sake, once became aware of all these numbers, record sales, you're number one on the radio right now, you won this poll, things like that, a fear set in that wasn't there before about, oh no, how can I hold on to this? And without realizing what was going on, I started to think about formulas. Well, what do we do on this record? And then meanwhile, the president of the label said to me, you know, can you try to do less medium tempo bluesy numbers? And so I want to explain why playing the blues and medium tempos was very important to me and is very important to me. Backing way up, when my father introduced me to this music, the very first thing he told me about the music, he says, if you like these records we're listening to, he says, you should understand, he said, this is black people's music. These are my father's words. I'm not being politically correct. I'm just telling you authentic about my experience. My father said, this is black people's music. He says, that doesn't mean that you and I can't enjoy it. He said, and there are even white people that play it well. He said, but most of the white people that play this music are actually imitating what the black people created. So what's been shown to me by my mentors, early on I worked with a great vocalist here in the Bay Area named Faye Carroll, who really sort of indoctrinated me into the blues. And the blues has taken me very far, and it's in my heart, this music. And to me, blues and swinging, which is a rhythmic thing, is central to this music, this Black American art form that we call jazz. So fast forward, I'm on Blue Note, and the president of Blue Note saying, can you do less medium tempo bluesy things? My head was going all over the place. Now, many years later, I'm not with a corporation. I'm not with any company. And one thing I've been embracing during this pandemic and isolation is just coming home to me, you know, who I've been all along. But early on, when I got signed to Blue Note Records in 1990, and the word trio got slapped around my name. And now I'm just in green. And I've liberated myself from all that. And I could talk a lot more, but we have Professor Allen here, you know, who could speak volumes about his history in the music. So I want to relinquish the floor.
Well, for me, I'm not. I guess I won't really speak too much about my history unless someone has specific questions. But one thing I will say, which is really important to a lot of the younger musicians, is to understand the importance of not only community, but this is a social music. And I say that because and I'm kind of speaking out of ignorance, but I reflect back to, 30 years ago or so, how much as musicians we used to spend hanging, hanging on the road. You finish a gig at the Vanguard at 2 o'clock. You hanging out in front of the club till 4:30 or whatever. And my concern, in part, because of social media and so many other things, that we've allowed that to replace the personal interaction that we have with people, which is the thing that helps makes the thing happen when we're on the bandstand. When just not, it's not just about having fun playing with people, but the other musician's favorite dessert, their favorite movies, their family members, and those things that you get from spending time with people. And the social aspect, and one of the things that I didn't understand when I first came to New York was that I just thought if you could play, you would work. And then I noticed that there were people who could play who weren't really working as much as some people who were working all the time who I didn't think played as well as others. And then I later understood about the social aspect of it, Now we can debate about the pros and cons of that, because there's saying that to say, for all of the students, you guys need to understand, if you continue to do this, some of the people that you've been in ensembles with and classes with, 40 years from now, you may be back on the bandstand with them, or hopefully before then. But that social element is just really, 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 really important. And part of the tradition of this music, of traveling. I mean, my first professional gig, which I'll preface by saying I had no business on the bandstand. I'm from Milwaukee, but growing up, a lot of people would come through doing what's called singles. Horn players would come, and then they play with local rhythm section. And I had been hanging out, and there were certain guys that used to always do those gigs, and I guess they were busy. But I got a call, do a couple of nights with Sonny Stitt and Reddy Holloway, and I was 16. And I will, again, preface it by saying I had no business on the bandstand. I was not ready. But that happened because I had been hanging out, and older musicians knew me and trusted me. And, so a lot of times, we don't get the call when we think we should. And sometimes when we do get the call, we don't think we should have gotten the call, or variations of all of those things. You just got to stay in the game. You just got to, as I said, as a musician, every day of your life, on and off the bandstand, is an audition. Every single day. You can be at Target. You can be at the grocery store. Somebody's watching you. And so you always got to be mindful of just constantly being the student, and also understand how you carry yourself, because those things are really, really important. I can guarantee you guys, Professor Dashiell would not have called us to be a part of this today if he had to worry about if we would show up cursing you guys out, calling you names, drunk or just silly or what have you. Because, you start to understand we're all in this thing together, and we become a reflection of each other. I mean, one really great lesson that I learned years ago from a gentleman that I've played with for about 30 years, a saxophonist named Benny Golson. And I'll never forget, we were in Europe. This is many years ago. And on a festival, and the drums were absolutely horrible. And I was not happy. And the thing is, the drums that I requested, they had on the side of the stage that they had decided I couldn't play those drums because someone else was going to play them. So they gave me this big rock and roll kit with a hole in the front head, and all blah, 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 all of that. And, and I let them know I wasn't happy about it. And so Benny pulled me aside afterwards. He said, Carl, you have to find a way to get people to do the things for you that you want, and that they'll be happy to do them for you. Now, they'll do them tonight because you're with me. He said, but you don't want them doing them and cursing you at the same time. He said, and the unfortunate part about it is that we could leave here and they may not remember your name. They'll just say Benny Golson's drummer was difficult. And that really grew me up quite a bit. And I was like, wow. And that's when you start to understand how you are always connected to somebody, right? You're a reflection of somebody. And so when you are a side man, you have to understand who you're accountable to. We're all accountable to somebody, right? And so all of those things on and off the bandstand is really important. And I think sometimes until you have some life experience, we think there's a disconnect between the two, but it's really all part of the same thing. When you're on the bandstand, when you're off the bandstand, and I learned many years ago, if you're on the road with someone, you're representing them from the time you leave your house until you get back home, right? And it's not just while you're on the bandstand. It could be while you're having breakfast at the hotel. If you're, going to see a movie and something happened, it's like, well, who you in town with? Well, what? I was like, wow, okay. So, that's so, I'm going back to the social element and how important this is because just being able to play is not enough, especially in New York, because you get to New York, there's so many people that can play. And sometimes if you don't know, you just assume because I can play, everything should be cool. Well, that's not always the case, so there are always different layers. And I'll tell you, as one of my mentors says, that relationships and resources are cyclical. I'll just give you very briefly. I'm sitting here talking with you guys because of Professor DeShield. And of course, we met many, many years ago. Well, I don't know, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, I don't know, maybe a little less, I did a clinic out at Cal State Hayward. And at the time, the director of jazz studies, his name is Mitch Butler. And he said, Mr. Allen, it's a pleasure to see you again. And I'm saying to myself, well, we ain't never met before. And he says, I was a student at East Carolina University with Professor Carol DeShield when you came there one time. Now, here's a guy at this point, he's now Dr. Butler. And I said, boy, I feel really old. Now, to show you how this stuff works out, so he left there. A couple of years ago, he started working at UMKC with Bobby Watson in Kansas City. And just recently, I accepted the position as the endowed chair of the Jazz Studies program at UMKC after Bobby retired, working with Mitch Butler. So my point is that it's the whole thing of things being cyclical and relationships. It's like, I just think about what would have happened if I treated Dr. Butler really, really bad there. Now all of a sudden we're going to be working together again. That could be pretty rough for everybody. So, you think about these things about, again, the social element and aspect of the music. And I'll tell you a great lesson. Unfortunately, the Betty Carters and the Art Blakeys and the Freddie Hubbards and many others are not with us anymore. But even those great musicians will tell you, I don't care how hip you think you are, nobody's hipper than the music. So we can pat ourselves on the back all we want. Ain't nobody, well, there might be. I haven't met them. I just haven't met anybody who's hipper than the music yet. Maybe Carol DeShield.
Nah, man, I'm just trying to find B flat, man. Man, that's beautiful, guys. Man, really, really, really great, man. I'm gonna date myself. I have a question that I think is interesting for both of you gentlemen. If we walked into your houses now and you had one record on the turntable, what would it be that you're listening to? If we got in your car right now, and if you're like me, you got an older one that has a CD player, what CD would be in the changer? And fast forward to now, what record or recording would you be listening to on your files?
I'll go second.
Well, for myself, first of all, I don't drive. So at home, I'm listening to a Sonny Clark record called Leapin' and Lopin'. It's from 1961, and it's primarily a quintet with the trumpeter Tommy Turrentine, who actually grew up with my father in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as children, have their elementary school photo together. And a great tenor saxophonist named Charlie Rouse, who I first heard as a child on my father's Thelonious Monk album called Monk's Dream. And Sonny Clark is the pianist and band leader and primary composer on the album. And the bassist is named Butch Warren, and the drummer is named Billy Higgins. And this rhythm section of Sonny Clark, Butch Warren, and Billy Higgins, they recorded numerous albums on the Blue Note label between 1960 and 1962. And this is one of the great rhythm sections. And one thing that I'm finding today in hearing some of the young players and hearing the evolutions and shifts that have occurred in the music is that there's an abundance of talent today, but the sort of predominant conception of how what I'll call the jazz rhythm section, or we can just say the rhythm section, is approached. And the core of the rhythm section is the bass and the drums. And it's not about what year the music was played in, but it's about what the priorities are of the musicians that I've seen somewhat of a radical shift occur in recent years to when I hear most young bassists and drummers playing together now, their approach to the time, to the existent quarter note that's being addressed humanly, is almost like they're playing off of each other. Whereas, if I'm not being too narrow in my description, they used to be much more of a sense of playing together in rhythm sections. And this music that I love, I personally am not really invested in following trends. And that's not for me to say that other people shouldn't be. I can only just talk about my own tastes, because Professor DeShiel, you asked about what I'm listening to. So I'm fascinated in listening to this record and this music that I'm talking about here, because I find that although I didn't come up through going through the academia and the collegiate system, I did grow up with these fake books. We had a real book too, but it was just a paper edition. And I realized there's a lot of fallacy in how the music becomes codified, how the blues gets taught in terms of chord symbols, and how great artists like John Coltrane, who to me represents a feeling, a sound, and a spirit, he gets represented as mathematics in the academic system. So when I listen to a great record like Sonny Clark, Leapin' and Lopin', I'm really fascinated with all these human things that the musicians are doing, which you can't really write down on paper. And I'm continuing to learn from some of the same records I've been listening to all my life. And I'm constantly realizing and appreciating more and more about the humanity in the music. So I'm just going to name that one record for now, because as I said, I don't drive a car, and my music system is my computer, so it is files. So that's what I'm listening to.
That's cool, man. And that's also, man, all of those names you mentioned too, man. That's that DC connection. Washington D.C. with Rouse and Butch Warren and Sonny. Oh man, yeah, man. There's a club, Mr. Wise, a little hole in the wall club in D.C. And I used to go, man, sneak in there, man, when I was 14 to 15 years old and listen to them, man. Yeah, definitely. Mr. Allen, Professor Allen.
Well, so does that mean we get 3 records? Well, that's a good question, because what I have been doing, one of the things that I've been doing with this time is going back, listening more, and I'm discovering things that I had not heard or really paid much attention to, or it didn't have an impact on me before as it is now. And I'll give you one example. There's several, but one, it's very interesting when you're blessed enough to be able to get the backstory of a record or how something happened. So recently, last year, I was listening to Stanley Turrentine's Sugar. And of course, it's Freddie and Stanley Turrentine, Ron Carter, Billy Kay. And I noticed something that I hadn't noticed many, many years ago when I first started listening to this record, which is during the head, Ron is playing in 2 and Billy Kay is playing in 4. Now, having played with Ron, I know how intentional of a player he is. But I remember calling him in December, about a week before Christmas, just to wish him a happy holidays. And I said, Ron, I said, I got a question for you. And this is my really bad Ron Carter impression. I said, you know, I want to ask you about a record, and you've done so many, I'm not sure if you remember. Which one was it, man? I said, it was Sugar, Stanley Turrentine. Yeah, I remember that. What about it? I said, well, I noticed it seemed like you were playing in 2 and Billy Kay was playing in 4 during the head. I said, was that on purpose? Of course. I said, well, why did that happen? He said, okay, let me explain something to you, Carl. See, we were all famous. Billy wasn't famous. And so Billy was nervous, and, you know, I could tell he was rushing a little bit, and I said, no, this can't happen. So we started to play, and I noticed, and I said, okay, I'll play in 2 and kind of hold him back and let him relax a little bit. I see, that was beautiful. I said, and then coming out of the head, going into the solos, you broke it up and started swinging in 4. It was beautiful. Yeah, I know, man. I know. I said, okay. So it's not like I was enlightening him, telling him something he didn't know, but it was just fascinating, and is fascinating to me as you listen and go into depth to see how intentional people are about some of the choices that they make. And one of the things that I also find fascinating, and I have for many years, and a lot of young people are sometimes paralyzed by the idea of making a mistake. And one of the things Art Blakey used to say, and he used to tell me this, a mistake is only a mistake if you don't know what to do with what you've done. And I've often said that if you listen to jazz recordings specifically, they are full of mistakes, but we don't recognize them as mistakes because they found something creative to do with what it was that they were doing. And just that whole thing of being intentional. And so, again, the gift of having this time has allowed me to be able to listen in depth to some things that I just may not have paid attention to, because when you have so many other distractions, but when you got nothing to do but just sit and listen to a record, it's beautiful. And I asked, and I'm curious to know from some of the people who are on here, the students, one of the questions that I've been asking the past couple of years with students is, what was the last record you listened to start to finish without any interruptions? And what I find fascinating is that a lot of young people have never, ever listened to a record start to finish. And again, I'm not saying what jazz record. It could be any record. I don't care what it is. But I ask that because I think the way we hear music greatly influences how we play. And so if you think about a person's listening experience where you listen to your favorite part, then you skip to the next part, and then you're going to rewind to the other part, and then you go to the 9th track, and then you go to the 2nd track. That's kind of how some of us play, right? We don't allow things to naturally happen. For example, you think about when a lot of people play a ballad. How many people have played a ballad all the way through versus after 2-3 choruses it's double time? And not because the music dictated, because they're bored, so they just want to get to the fun part. The same thing when we talk about playing in 2. You know, Benny Golson would say when you're playing with him and you playing in 2, he said, I want you to stay in 2 until you can't take it any longer. And then if you can't take it, okay, go to 4. But the idea for him was that the 2 has an opportunity to have a personality of its own. You know, but that's intentional, you know, and so, you know, that whole process. And again, some of that you don't get until you actually can sit and talk to people about the music. That's another aspect of the social element of the music, to just sit and talk. Man, what are you listening to? Well, why? Well, why do you tell me why you like Johnny Griffin, whose birthday is today. Why is it that you like, you know, I remember years ago, Benny and I were on tour together with this group, and we called Jazz Futures, and on that tour, part of that tour was Ray Brown, and I'll never forget, we were in Japan, and Ray was talking to me about Art Blakey and how he used to hear Art play Billy Eckstine when he was 16. But he was just talking about how Art had such a command of the music that at one point everybody was influenced by him. Younger drummers, older drummers, you know, just because of his way of just dealing with the music. But again, I talk about the social aspect because having just being able to sit and talk to him face to face, and so many others that many of us have been blessed to be able to do, you get an inside track in terms of how some of this stuff happens that you're just not going to get in a book and you're not going to find it on YouTube. But again, being able to just ask questions and talk to people and listen is very, 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 very important.
Yeah, man, that's great. Both Carl and Benny, man, he has some very enlightening views and also very enlightening history too. You know, the history all intertwined in there. I'd like to. One of the reasons why I hadn't done this before was because it was something that you said, Carl. Actually, sitting there listening as opposed to being preoccupied or occupied with something else like we do with the texting and the chatting and all of that. But I am now going to open up the floor for questions from and you know, a lot of times we don't feel comfortable in speaking out. So if you would like to ask a question in the chat, please feel free to do that. We have Rachel Howard who is monitoring that, and she'll interject when there's a message that comes through the chat. But I'd like to open the floor for questions. Anybody have a question? Just raise your hand or unmute, and then we'll try to recognize you. Jonah, I think Jonah Smith.
Yeah. What was it like meeting Oscar Peterson and recording that album with him, Oscar and Benny?
Are you a pianist?
Yeah.
Oh, good
Yes,
to
sir.
meet you. Well, I was working with Ray Brown's trio in Toronto, which is near where Oscar Peterson was living at the time. He lived in a town called Mississauga, like almost like a suburb of Toronto. And I've always been an intuitive person, but back then I was very almost governed and driven by my intuitions. And I was having, for some reason, which I can't explain cognitively, a premonition that I was going to meet Oscar Peterson this year. I felt it coming closer and closer. And so we arrived in Toronto that week, and Ray Brown mentioned to me that Oscar might be coming down on the weekend to hear us. So I walked in on one night on the weekend, I believe it was the Saturday evening, and there was Oscar and his wife Kelly seated at the table with Ray and our drummer, the great Jeff Hamilton. So I met Oscar before the show, and we played the first set, and it went well. We had a good set, but nevertheless, because my profound esteem for Oscar, I just went straight to the dressing room and hid after the first show. But I couldn't escape because there in the dressing room was a huge photograph of Oscar Peterson. And, you know, my foundation, my parents gave me about how you speak with people, it set in, and my conscience said, no matter how you feel about your playing, Benny, you need to go out there and thank the man for coming to the show. So I went out into the audience, and Oscar was there, and he took my hand. Oscar had really big hands. He could reach a 12th, an octave and a half. It's as well. And some of the music Rachmaninoff writes and tells are really widespread. And Oscar, he took my right hand in his, and it dwarfed my right hand. And he said, it's a pleasure to hear the piano played the way I like to hear it played. And that's when our friendship began. Email had just started, but I wasn't emailing back then. And I asked Oscar if I could have a lesson while I was in town. He told me he had plans for the next day, but he gave me his address and telephone number, and he suggested we correspond. He said, you write me a letter. And so back then, because we didn't have email or texting, he compelled me to actually write down my thoughts and feelings and send it in the mail, not getting an instant response. And it was character building to speak with my hero in this form, write him actual letters. And we exchanged letters over the ensuing months. And I could tell you a lot about our relationship, but I know we have a lot of students with a lot of questions. So you asked me about recording the album Oscar and Benny with Oscar and Ray Brown and Gregory Hutchinson. And that took place a few years later in 1998, I believe, if not 97. And we had two pianos set up in the studio in Toronto, side by side. And the piano I was playing had a really stiff action. I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Jonah?
Jonah.
Jonah, yeah, I'm right. Okay, so Jonah had a really stiff action. It almost like exaggeratedly so, almost like someone was playing a prank on me. And I was so honored to be in this situation. I didn't want to complain about anything. However, on the second day of the 2-day recording session, when it looked like Oscar was out of the control room, I finally broke down a little bit, and I just said in a soft voice to the engineer, I said, "Man, this piano is kicking my butt." All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, Oscar Peterson appeared in the room. He said, "What's that, Benny? Is your piano giving you a hard time?" And I must have turned beet red with shame and embarrassment, because it was inappropriate for me to be complaining about the instrument when I'm getting this unspeakable honor. I'm the only pianist other than Count Basie who Oscar has ever invited to be on a record session with him. It's an unspeakable honor. And I said, "Oh no, Oscar, the piano's fine." He said, "No," he wouldn't let it go. He said, "No, you're having a hard time with it?" I said, "No, Oscar, really, it's fine." Oscar said, "I have a suggestion." He said, "Why don't you play the piano I've been playing, and I'll play the instrument that you've been playing." Again, I'm like I said, I'm red in the face, man. I said, "Oh no, Oscar, we can't do that." Oscar just said with a smile, "I insist on it." End of story. So we went back out into the studio, and I sat to the piano that Oscar had been playing, and he sat to the piano that I'd been playing. And we did a take, and Oscar just burned, man. He just wiped. And so after we did the take, I turned to Oscar. I said, "Okay, I see it's not the piano, it's the piano player." And Oscar just smiled at me sweetly, and he said, "Well, one must adjust." The producer of the session told me when I flashed some cold water on my face, Oscar turned to him and said, "Now that'll be a good lesson for him." I try not to complain about instruments anymore, but every once in a while, being human, I compromise my integrities. But by and large, the quality of instruments that people like myself have been provided is far superior to the kind of pianos that Oscar Peterson and Art Tatum played when they were coming up. These people laid the foundation, the groundwork, so it could be better for us. Look forward to hearing you play, Jonah.
But look, man, you will, man. That's what, man. I love that, man. You say one must adjust, man. I'm gonna get a T-shirt made with that one, Benny.
All kinds of meaning, right?
That's right. That's right. Questions from anyone else? Tucker, I saw you sit up.
Oh, well, I kind of,
Go ahead, Tucker.
oh, I'm sorry. No, well, I sat up because I do have some questions, but I kind of took over, Andrew had
Andrew's spot, yeah.
letting people in and, advocating this, but I'm going to let other people go first before. That's what I was.
Okay, well, it's good. Well, you got it open now. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say it's an honor and a great pleasure to have both of you guys here, and I appreciate it very much. Carl Allen, I'm a drummer myself. I'm a big fan. And I just wanted to know, it's a super cliche question, and a lot of drummers probably share the same similarities between these people. But when you were coming up and were younger, as a drummer, who did you like to listen to as a drummer for drums, other drummers, but also me? I found myself listening to other people has also influenced my drumming greatly, not just drummers. So both drummers and non-drummers, who did you like to listen to and take inspiration from when you were coming up?
Well, thank you very much for that, for those kind words. So before I started playing jazz, I grew up playing in church, and I grew up playing a lot of R&B and soul, and so a lot of the Motown stuff. And then I always say I kind of came to jazz through a side door. The very first jazz record that I actually bought was by a saxophonist named Benny Carter, and I did not like it because I didn't understand it. And I'll never forget. I used to get an allowance of $1, and the record cost 50 cents. And I was upset that I spent half of my allowance on this record that I didn't understand or like. So I sold it to my brother for $1, so I thought I won, you know. But in terms of being conscious of who the drummers were, Maurice White. Maurice White is a drummer that people don't even realize he was a drummer with Ramsey Lewis, but he had played, people know him from Earth, Wind, and Fire. But then really big into the fusion thing with Billy Cobham and Lenny White and people like that. And in high school, my band director was a drummer, and he would bring records for me to school for me to check out. And he would explain to me about Art Blakey and Philly Joe and Max Roach and people like that. But I'll tell you, I was always conflicted because what I was hearing that really captured me wasn't really just from drums. I've always really loved melody, so I'll never forget. I don't know, maybe a year or so after playing with Freddie, Freddie used to always talk to me about stuff, and I jokingly say it was about music, it was about girls, it was about girls, and it was about music, and then it was about girls, and then it was about women, and then girls, and then music, right? That was usually what it kind of evolved around. But I remember we were on the road, and we were having something to eat, and I just said, Freddie, I have to talk to you about something. He says, what? I said, well, I got a problem. And he just looked at me. He said, you got a problem? I said, yeah. And he literally threw his sandwich on the floor. He said, Carl, I told you to leave that girl alone. I said, no, it's not that kind of problem. It's another kind of problem. He said, well, what is it? I said, I don't think I'm hearing drums the way I'm supposed to hear the drums. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, man, I hear what Art is doing and Higgins and Max and all of that. I said, but I know I'm supposed to be able to do that, but I also want to be able to do what you do, but on drums. And he just looked at me, and then he started laughing. And when he started laughing, I said, man, I'm in trouble. And I said, and he could tell I was very confused and concerned about him laughing. He said, well, Carl, no, excuse me. He said, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing because it reminds me of me. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's a long tradition. When you first hit the scene in New York and people are talking about you, they want to know who you sound like, right? So if they said there's a new trumpet player, there's a new bass player, that was, because people try to get a reference. And so he said when he first came to town, people were talking about him. They said, well, man, who is this trumpet player from Indianapolis? Does he sound like Dizzy? Nope. Does he sound like Miles? Nope. Does he sound like Clark? Nope. And he said the reason he didn't sound like other trumpet players because he got a lot of his ideas from saxophone players. And then he said, Carl, a lot of saxophone players' lines are long. Trumpet players' lines tend to be a bit shorter. He said, I'm not talking about how long their solos are, just the length of their lines. And if you listen to my lines are long like saxophone players. And he said, and when I came to New York, I used to go to these sessions, and it would be Hank Mobley and Coltrane and Wayne and Sonny Rollins and different people, but a lot of saxophone players. And he said, what bass player do you think was in a lot of those sessions? And he's just talking about at people's apartments and stuff. And I said, well, who? Before I could even really get it out, he says, Paul Chambers. He said, and Paul Chambers' lines are long like saxophone players. And that was a pivotal moment for me because it gave me permission to explore. And what he said, Carl, you can do all of that you're talking about, as long as you make sure you do what drummers are supposed to do, make sure that ride cymbal is happening. But it was an aha moment, because up until that point I felt very confused, because I was hearing one thing but didn't know even if I can give myself permission to hear what I was hearing. And then Freddie was the one who kind of said, explore that, but and then of course I really got into a lot of the drummers that they were already like my heroes, Art Blakey and Elvin and Higgins and Roy and Max and Jimmy Cobb and Mel Lewis and Tootie Heath and so many others, Billy Higgins. It's interesting. And I say this to those who are a little hesitant to ask questions, but it's so very, very important for you guys to ask questions, right? Because one of the things that helped me tremendously was asking people stories about people that I really admired. For instance, I would ask Freddie, I would ask Jackie McLean, I would ask Cedar, I would ask George Coleman, specifically about Billy Higgins. Because my question was, I know why I love Billy, but I'm not playing with Billy. You guys played with Billy. You guys hired Billy. Why do you love Billy? And it was really great to hear their response. And many of them just said, Carl, he just has a way of making the music feel better. On and off the bandstand, And that was really fascinating, because just to hear their perspective about why they love Billy and what he brought, to see how it matched with how I heard Billy, was fascinating. And then I can tell you about May of 1994. I was playing at a club in New York. It was a Monday night at this club called Bradley's. And I remember it was a Monday night because Bradley's used to go Monday through Saturday, and all of the other clubs would primarily go Tuesday through Sunday. And Higgins was in town doing a 2-week engagement at Sweet Basil's with Cedar Walton and Ron Carter. And this was their night off in between their 2 weeks. And I was playing with James Williams and Ray Drummond. And Higgins used to always call me baby boy. And so I'm playing, and then I just hear this voice behind me. I hear you. All right, baby boy. And as soon as I turn around, he's over my shoulder and has a stick on my cymbal. So of course I slide off the drums, and I'll never forget, because my son was just 4 months old at that time, and I slide off the drums, and I'm just watching this man, and I'm crying. And I remember the waitress come up to me. She said, Carl, you okay? I'm like, yeah. Everything okay at home? I said, yeah. Is the baby okay? I'm like, yeah. She said, why are you crying? I said, listen to Billy. Because within 8 measures, he took it from like here to way up to, didn't take a solo. He's just smiling and playing. And his humanity just came through the ride cymbal. Him grunting, him smiling, him doing his head like he does, like Stevie Wonder. And it was just so much joy and love. I mean, like instant. It's not like, let me get to it, let me warm up to it. It was immediate. And you start to think about how musicians of that level, there's no dialing it in. It's just instant, automatic. So again, I know that's a bit of a departure from your question, but I only mention that because when you can take time to go a little bit deeper into the people that you say you admire, it gives you a better understanding about their conceptual approach to the instrument.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful, man. I mean, I think that you were obviously, you and Benny and I have talked, man, about a lot of different things, a lot of different situations, man. I think one of the things that we keep coming back to is that spirituality, that inner humanity and spirituality, that love. That's sometimes it's not. It's not happy. Sometimes it's sad. Sometimes it's angry. But it's spiritual, and I think that is something that I call it institutionalized academia that can't necessarily be taught, but has to be talked about and it has to be, you have to speak on that, and try to get all of our students to try to get to that. All of us don't get there, but when you do find it, and then it's not there, you know it. When if you've tasted it and it's not there, you know it, and that's something, man. That's
But I'll tell you, Carol. One of the things that I think about quite often is that when there's a reservation or hesitation to ask questions, and I get being
yeah.
shy, I get all of that,
Hmm.
but it comes down to something very basic and fundamental, which is the people that you have before you. Do they have information that can help you?
Right.
It's a yes or no. And if the answer is yes, your question has to be, well, what can I do or say to get some
Hmm.
information that's going to help me grow as a person, as a musician, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely,
And
absolutely.
like I said, you know, it, I tell you, what concerns me a little bit as time continues
Hmm.
is that some of those great life lessons that we got from all the people who are not with us anymore, it's like, how will that next generation learn those lessons, right? And the onus really becomes more on us and our generation to pass that on. But I mean, to think that, and that's why I don't take it for granted to think that the people that I grew up listening to and reading about in the history books, to have been on the bandstand with them, it's an honor. It's really a pleasure, and just, and so, you know, so, like, for instance, like, I don't understand when people don't have questions. It's like, how you not have questions, right? So I'm not saying that to shame anybody into asking questions. I'm just saying, I don't, yeah, you know.
No, I understand, man. I get it. I get it. That's it. I'm always asking, man.
You, you
That,
know,
yeah.
oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Okay, I see a kind of phenomenon taking place on social media right now, where people are more frightened than ever to just show themselves by way of talking about what's really on their mind, or
Right.
asking an honest question because they don't want to get shot down.
Mhm.
I've really been exercising uh, the liberty to speak about serious things that are on my mind.
Mhm.
And I see how much a lot of people, out of fear, are wanting to kind of stand underneath an umbrella of a certain platform.
Right.
Uh, and I think it's been the case, as me and both of you veteran professors have seen over the years, that often students in classroom settings have been somewhat socially shy. But now I'm wondering if that's more the case than ever. Right, start of our forum here today, we're really not here just to lecture at you. We want to actually help you. And if
Right.
you can simply ask what's really on your mind, maybe beyond what was this like, but tell
Mhm.
us about what your challenges are,
Yeah.
what your concerns are, then perhaps we can offer some life perspective, not being of your generation, but having lived.
Yeah.
So please, let's use this time. This is for your education, and we're all here with hearts to help you.
I have a question.
Buddy? Yeah, I'm gonna go again.
You can go ahead, Tucker. I'll go after you.
Josh, go ahead, Josh. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Okay, just go ahead.
So I'm Joshua. I play saxophone. I just thought I'd inquire on whoever wants this. When you are learning a new song or melody to it, what do you think the next step is after that in trying to digest this new piece of music?
Joshua I don't know if everyone was having the same audio experience I was, but his voice was kind of breaking up. Something about learning a new song and what's next, but I want to hear the actual question. Are you maybe really close to your computer? I don't know what's causing it to break up, but I personally couldn't hear your question in totality.
Yeah, yes. Just repeat your question, Josh. I think Josh.
My question was, when you're learning a new piece of music and you get past looking at the melody and the chords of the song, what it is, or what do you look at after that to learn this music?
Did you get it, Benny? I had you break up.
I think I got more of the question that time. I can try to. Is this? Should I take the floor?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Joshua, are you? I think what I heard you ask is when you're learning a new piece of music, and I'm paraphrasing my own words. You said you've looked at the melody and you've looked at the chord changes, and you're asking us what's next after that. Was that sort of the crux of your question?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say, you talk about getting past looking at the melody, so essential for a song, and it's very rare for me to hear a young musician who's truly taken the time and care and shown the respect to really learn a melody. I want to say, for example, if you're learning a piece of standard repertoire or you're learning someone's original songs, let's take a traditional form, like a song that has an AABA form. These often songs have a first ending and a second ending and a third ending that are not identical. And I find that something happens sometimes in the whole school system when you have a lot of assignments being thrown at you, that sometimes young people will take a sort of superficial approach to learning a song and maybe homogenize that they play the second ending all 3 times, for example. There's so much essential information in the title of a song and in the melody. The chords that you speak of, the harmony, is only relevant to the melody itself. And generally, in the title of a song, there's some information there about what the composer was wanting to convey. Maybe it's a story, an image, or it's about a person. And that's really at the core of those melodic intervals and the harmony. Great Benny Golson once asked me, he said, "Benny, do you know what melodies are?" I said, "Please tell me." He's one of our finest composers and arrangers in the music. I said, "Please tell me." He said, "Melodies are intervals." He said, "Melodies are combinations and sequences of intervals." And he says, and with the space between 2 notes, he says, you can affect people. He said, you can affect people's breathing, their thoughts, their emotions. So I just want to say, I'm not trying to be overly abstract either, Joshua, but let's not be in a hurry. When you talked about you've looked at the melody, you've looked at the chords, that's a whole lot if you've really done that. I honestly believe, because one thing that we get to do in playing this music, this art form of improvised music that I call jazz, is we get to bring our own personality, our own soul, our own character into our interpretation. And what I find is if I've really embraced a melody, and you talked about the chords, if I've really looked at how the harmony supports the melody from the bottom up, not just a chord symbol, the juxtaposition of the bass movement and the lead movement as a fugue. If I've really looked at that, then my God, I'm going to have a whole lot that I want to bring to the music humanly. My head, what I want to do next. If I've really invested myself in learning the song. There's a lot more that could be said, but I want to say that much rather than look at, we do A and then you do B and then you do C. You're talking about doing A and B, learning a melody, learning a harmony. That's a whole lot right there. And chances are, what I find is that the way most stylists, most of us, myself wholeheartedly included, our conception of playing is often something like a combination of about 3 or 4 of our very favorite players, only we have this idea that we're going to be even cooler with it. That's your conception. Almost everyone. So you probably, who are some of your favorite saxophonists, Joshua?
Some of my favorite are Dexter Gordon, Sonny Rollins, probably Charlie Parker.
That's a whole lot of music right there, man. So
Yeah.
you probably already got ideas and feelings and sounds going on inside you. And if you invest yourself in learning that melody and learning the harmony, I don't think you even need anyone to tell you what to do next with it, man. You just give it you. Put Joshua into it, man. That's my take.
Yeah, Carl, you want to speak to that too, man?
Well, there's not much more I can add to that. You know, I will say this, and it's kind of a surface answer. You're never really done with the song.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's always interesting when I hear people say, well, you know, I just want to, and I'm old school. I mean, I you know, admittedly, when people say, I don't want to play any standards. Well, okay. What do you want to play? Well, I want to play my music. Well, probably outside your mama and grandma, but don't nobody know your music, right? And so the standards are really, they're really kind of the fabric of this. But I do think with this paradigm shift that we're in, it's time to update this list of standards. Now that's going to upset a whole lot of folks. I mean, American Songbook is great, but I think in addition to that, so many people have come along, you know, that we need to be looking at their music.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, whether it's Benny or Mulgrew or James Williams or Donald Brown or whomever, it's just there's so much great stuff that we just, you know. But I'm just saying, you know, when we talk about learning standards and learning, you know, repertoire, it's just important to go deeper, you know, because there's so much information there that we can get, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool.
I'll tell you a funny story. It's funny now. It wasn't funny when it happened. So a few years ago, I was a guest at some school in Missouri, and so like you know, guest for the festival. So I was there for a couple of days, and a couple of days before I get there, the director calls me. Says, "Carl, you know, so while you're here, you're gonna have to do a master class." I said, "No problem." He said, "Would you like the students to play with you?" I'm absolutely. What would you like to play? I said, "It's a master class. We'll just call something." No. We got to know in advance. I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. The students can pick the tunes. A blues, rhythm changes, and just pick something else." I said, "Okay." So now a couple of days go by. I'm there at the school. About 20 minutes before the master class, a young man comes to me. He's a senior saxophonist in the big band, getting ready to graduate. "Mr. Allen, my name is so-and-so, and I'm supposed to play with you during the master class." I said, "That's beautiful." I said, "You pick some tunes?" "Yeah." I said, "Great." I said, "What would you like to play?" He said, "Ten of Madness." I said, "That's great." I said, "Who wrote that?" I said, I said, "That's the first or the last name?" No. I said, and he really, it's not like he just froze. He just didn't know. I said, "Sonny Rollins." "Oh, he dead, right?" I said, "No, he's not dead." And I said, "So sing me the melody." He go get the fake book. I said, "No, sing me the melody. You chose the song." He had no clue. And not only that, he didn't even know that there was another saxophonist, John Coltrane. He didn't even know was on that record. And I said, "Now you picked the song, right?" Yeah. I said, "Okay, all right." And this was the same person who earlier in the day wanted to ask me about, you know, how to get a record deal. I was like, yeah, I wasn't the right person to ask that question. So you got to go deeper. You got to go deeper. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Jake Avalos.
Hey, my name is Jake. I'm a bass player,
From State
and
Farm?
from State Farm, yeah. So I'm currently a senior, and I'm about to graduate in a couple weeks. and I guess I got kind of like this is like a double question. The first part of it is what advice would you guys give someone who's newly trying to go and get onto the scene? Like, would I have to move to a major city? Like, just stuff like that. And then also, you guys both played with amazing bass players like, Professor DeShiel, Ray Brown, Christian McBride, all them. Like, what is it that you guys loved about their playing, and so on?
I'll do the follow up.
Okay, so you asked about getting on the scene. Well, there's all sorts of scenes. There's not one scene on the real. I'm not trying to be facetious at all. It's a very personal thing. Like I mentioned, I can only speak of my life, and I won't belabor the point. But for me, there was a focus that I wanted to play with Art Blakey. So that informed everything for me. You dig? So you said you play the bass. You play upright, you play acoustic, electric, or both?
Yeah, I play both.
Okay, do you lean more towards one than the other?
A little more towards upright than electric.
And who would you like to play with?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of people I'd love to play with.
Is there like if you could, is there someone who really stands out?
I mean, honestly, I would love to play with you guys. That would be
like collectively. You want to play with Carol DeShiel too? I'm not trying.
He can't have my gig, man. I'm playing with y'all.
I'm a double bass. Okay, so if you want to play with Professor Allen, it's really a matter of, I would say, listening to his recordings and getting a sense on your own before you even endeavor to speak with him of like what you notice that he seems to really like in a bassist. And that's going to inform some things for you. I know you talk about getting on a scene, like almost, in a geographic or networking kind of sense, but you want to tune into the people you want to play with. What are they about? Because they're artists. And any band leader who's worth their salt has certain things that they like and certain things they don't like. Any good band leader. Like you take the Count Basie ending. You know what that is, right? You're not going to hear that with the John Coltrane Quartet. Doesn't mean it's bad. It's all about conception and propriety. And, some people want to be eclectic. They want to do it all, and that's what's natural for them. Some people, like myself, I'm more of like a focused person. I like certain things, and I'm comfortable with that. So it's very much being an artist, which you are, is about being true to yourself. Because the best thing that you have to offer others is your honesty, man. You dig? Your musical and emotional and spiritual honesty, your own authenticity. So I would encourage you, in all seriousness, to think about who you really want to play with. Maybe it's several people. Maybe there's someone who really stands out for you, as was the case for me. And that's going to really inform your choices. From there, we're in a new age than the one that myself and Professor DeShiel and Professor Allen came up with, where it was much more in-person community. We could go to clubs, meet people, be well-dressed, respectful, hopefully get a chance to speak with the band, maybe not, come again. Maybe you finally get a chance to speak with them. If your attitude is right and they like your whole comportment, at some point you might get a chance to sit in. But now we're in a new paradigm, if you will, right? And don't apply parallels that don't exist, and yet I feel the most significant ones, the human themes that have been going on throughout the ages, even before this music existed, those are constant. So the thing is, as I see it, the music needs living practitioners. We're like angels. We're like musical angels. The reason I say angels is we can impart peace, and we can heal with our music, with those melodies that Joshua was asking about. So you have that potential. You're actually a healer. That's why you're in this class. That's why we're all together. We have something in common. So you asked about, I'm going to just quickly shift, and I want to apologize if I'm getting a little prolific here in my speech, but you asked about what we collectively, individually like in these great bassists you mentioned, like Professor DeShiel or Ray Brown or Peter Washington or Christian McBride. I would endeavor to say, I'll speak for myself, but there's a collective sense that band leaders, we don't say, let me get that bass player who plays the really hot solos. We say, let me get that bass player that really knows how to groove the band, that makes the music feel good. That's who gets the calls. If you want to think about that, all the bassists that you mentioned just now, that beautiful short list that you gave us, they all bring so much warmth and love and a sense of responsibility. They're not prioritizing styling. They're really prioritizing serving the music, serving the time. They're great time players first and foremost. That's my take.
Yeah, you know, I agree with all of that. And I also think, you know, people quite often ask the question about, you know, about coming to New York or whatever. And my question goes back to, have you done everything that you can possibly do where you are? Because sometimes we'll say, well, when I get to New York, that's when I'm going to start transcribing. When I get to New York, that's when well, you know, New York, it's maybe a little different now. I don't really hang that much, but it's was a very unforgiving scene in a sense that if you came out and basically you're announcing I'm here and certain things weren't together, it's kind of like you got to go back to the end of the line because there's just so many people waiting. But, you know, one of the traditions that I don't think really exists anymore is that when I first came to New York, if you wanted to sit in with someone, you would not dare ask to sit in unless you knew their music already. You didn't go to Horace Silver or Johnny Griffin or whomever and say, can I sit in, and expect they're going to call the blues or say what you feel like playing. They're going to play their book, and you needed to know their book, right? So the question is, you know, Benny asked, who do you want to play with? And so if you have a list and this is like people you really want to play with, not just like a fantasy, then learn their music. You know, I mean, and to the point because, you know, I'll give you an example. You know, when I first started talking to Freddie about McBride was 17. And I said, Fred, well, I'd never call him Freddie. I said, Hub, there's a bass player. I want to get him in the band. He said, well, who is he? I said, his name is Christian McBride. He said, I never heard of him. He said, where's he from? I said, Philly. He said, okay. Well, how old is he? I said, 17. He said, wait. He said, oh, stop. Ain't nobody 17 ready to play with me. I said, but Freddie, this guy, he ain't normal, man. Something wrong with this boy. He ain't normal. So shortly after that, I got a call from this promoter. Says, Carl, Freddie wanted me to call you for this gig. It's this gig called a Cool Jazz Festival All-Stars, and it's in Plantation, South Carolina. And it was with Freddie, Noah Pointer, Lonnie Liston Smith, and Gene Carn. And they said, and the gentleman said, can you get a bass player? I said, yeah. So I called McBride. I said, McBride, I got a gig with Freddie. I need to see if you can do it. Yeah. I said, well, you don't even know when it is. It don't matter. I can do it. I said, okay. So a couple of months later, we go to the gig. We go to Freddie's dressing room. Freddie would quite often have a piano in his dressing room. I said, Hub, this is the bass player I was telling you about. This is Christian McBride. And McBride said, Mr. Hubbard, I've been waiting to play with you since 4th grade. He said, what? How old were you in 4th grade? He said, 8. Normally you're 9, but he was 8. So he says, I know all of your music. And he sat at the piano and said, I know One of a Kind, bam. One of Another Kind, bam. I know Up Jumps. He just started playing all of Freddie's music on piano, right? And so, you know, he's kind of a freak in that sense that he's gifted in that way, but he also works really hard, right? So when we were in Benny's trio, we'd be in Europe, and we would always be fussing with him because we'd be in the airport or train station, and He's walking around looking like this with headphones on, but he was just listening all the time, all the time, all the time, right? So I say that to you also to just say, how bad do you really want to do that? I mean, I'll tell you like this. Art Blakey told me, and this was my biggest hero. One time he told me, he said, Carl, you're my competition. I said, I'm not your competition. He said, no, you're my competition. He said, you don't see it as that. He said, because you look up to me. He said, but what do you do for a living? You play drums. He said, what do I do? I play drums. Both of us really kind of dependent on our phone to ring for us to be able to work. He said, so I'm not letting up. I was like, dang. But I mean, it was humbling to hear that. But I mean, if you get down to just bare basics, right? But the other part about it, if you say, what do we look for me, the most important relationship in the band is bass and drums. We're dance partners. So I'm trying to find a bass player that I can dance with. And that is coming from what I consider a blue collar mindset, which is it's about playing good notes and good time and making it feel good. I could care less if I ever take a solo, and if my mindset is that you care more about playing a solo than you care about making it dance, then we probably would not have a good time. I'm saying that with love.
Amen. Yes,
We
absolutely.
have some questions in the chat box.
Okay,
So there
okay.
you are.
Yeah.
Waiting on you
Rachel,
all day.
Rachel, you read the first one, please.
Okay, so Yoshi Newman said, great stories, an honor to listen to y'all sharing this way. Thank you. It's rare air. You've been a lot of places, met a lot of people. What are 1, 2 big life lessons from music and about life that you can share? And what do you carry closest in your heart?
Should I proceed? First thing that comes to mind, because I dare say we've all been dealt many deep life lessons. So just the very first thing that came to mind was I was working with the great Betty Carter. I think we were in Germany. We were doing a long string of one-night gigs. Back in the 80s and 90s when the economy was different and we had these great band leaders, the music was thriving, and we would go to Europe sometimes, for many weeks at a time, 4 or 5, 6 weeks sometimes, primarily playing one-night gigs, one town to the next. So I guess I was getting a little fatigued because my road chops weren't up. I wasn't an experienced traveler. And we were in some small town. There are no small towns. It's a town, it's people. There's humans to play for. But for some reason, I wasn't bringing my all. At the sound check, and Betty got furious with me, and she yelled at me for a long time, loudly, in front of the band, in front of the producer of the concert, of the tech crew. She just dressed my butt down. That she said that it's a privilege to get to play music for people, and it doesn't matter if there's only 1, 2, 3 people out in the audience. You got to give them your all every time. And she laid into me the whole rest of the day and evening. That wasn't the end of it. On me. We went back to the hotel. I was getting ready for the gig, and I got down to the lobby, dressed, and Betty said, I heard your shower running. You were in the shower for a long time. She was just on me about every little thing, and she had a point to make. She was really trying to wake up my attitude, and I want to say my gratitude and humility to get to play for people. And sure enough, that night on the gig, she just laid into me. She really punished me. And the thing is, the whole time I was with Betty Carter, I was there to learn. And I never forgot that. And I was really grateful because Betty had a very mercurial personality. She could be so warm and she could really get angry too. And I was grateful when she would really lay into me because I was there to learn and grow. So I just want to say, if I'm not framing it too abstractly, that was an important lesson for me, that you bring your all, your utmost, every time you play, regardless of the circumstance. You asked what we keep in our hearts. For myself, it's always my mother and father, how they bought me records and they bought me piano lessons and they came to my shows and they cared for me. And we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but they prioritized. My father used to say, in our household, music comes before medicine. And I carry my departed father with me every time I touch the piano. He's with me. And when I write, I'm in the process of writing about my life right now. He's with me in everything I write, everything I do. More than ever before, he's coming to me in my dreams. I take my mother and father with me wherever I go and everything I do.
Yeah, similarly for me, well, I'll tell you, I always say that I pray that everyone will have a life-changing experience. And I was about to mention a story, an encounter I had with Art Blakey, but it was very similar to what Benny was said. But there was another time I was actually in L.A. with Benny. We were playing Catalinas, and Billy Higgins was sick. No, actually, I'm not sure if I was there with Benny. Billy Higgins was sick. He was waiting for this kidney transplant. And and Higgins, like I said, used to always call me baby boy. So I called him and I said, Billy, I'm just calling to see if you need something. I'm in town. And he said, no, I'm good, baby boy. And we talked for maybe 10 minutes. And right before we hung up, he said, baby boy, I need something. I said, yeah. So I grab a piece of paper and pencil, go to the store or whatever. And he said, I just need you to keep playing drums. I dropped the phone, and I think I was stretched across the bed for an hour just crying. And it makes me emotional now. And I couldn't stop. And several months later, after he had at the operation, I was back in L.A. playing with Art Farmer, and at this place called a Jazz Gallery. And we come off the bandstand, and he's standing in front of the stage, and he's just looking at me, smiling with his arms out. And I come off the stage, and he just, motions to the back to meet him in the back. And I'm standing there, and he just grabs me, and I just start crying. And he said, man, you remember the last time we talked? And I said, yeah. He says, you know why I said what I said? I said, no, Billy, I don't. He said, well, I remember when you first came to New York, man, and I know how much you love the drums, and I think people enjoy hearing you, and it's just important for you to keep playing. And I had to walk outside. And so what touched me so much, what still touches me now, that even in his state, not knowing if he was going to have another day to live, he could just think about me and how important it was to continue to play music. And I look at that, and I look at it on a much bigger level, because sometimes we don't understand how important this stuff is. And when you have met people like that, and like Dizzy and Art, who their life was about playing music and the things that they went through, you just can't take it for granted, And Art used to have this phrase that said, music is supposed to wash away the dust of everyday life. Every time we play, it's important. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who's there, where it's from, nothing. It does, and that's something that we can never forget, including your rehearsals in school, right? Because this is all in the audition for something else, as I said before. right? So I mean, just the littlest of things, and once you start to see the bigger picture, certain other things just mean so much more that you tend to not take for granted. You know that you can't take for granted certain things, and again, this is not about wagging the finger, but I've always found it interesting as I visit schools when I see students that show up late for rehearsals. And I don't understand it because I say, you're a music major. But what we find quite often in jazz, there's a certain level of casualness that would not be tolerated in the classical department, right? When I was teaching at Juilliard, occasionally I would see some young kid, usually Asian, a girl, running down the hallway. And at first I didn't understand it. And I would see it and I said, why are they running? And so they probably don't want to be late for orchestra rehearsal, right? Because they knew it was not acceptable to be late. And this is the thing we say we love, right? You're a music major. You want to do this for a living. And so sometimes I'll ask students, well, you were late. You didn't have your music ready. Would you do that in your biology class? And you're like, no. Why? Well, that teacher don't play. Well, why do we do that with this music, right? So, again, this is all out of love. My concern sometimes, though, is that you guys don't have the luxury that Professor Green, Professor DeShiel, and I had, which was those people who told us what we needed to hear, whether we liked it or wanted it or not, and didn't sugarcoat it, right? I never played in Betty Carter's band, but Betty and Art Blakey were very similar in the sense that when they walked in the club, even if you didn't know they were in the club, there was an air that just came over the whole spot, and everybody just straightened up because it was kind of like, uh-oh. And you knew something was going on. Then you might see Art standing by the door or see Betty at the bar, but you just knew. You just knew. You had to, your stuff better be right. And we're not talking about perfection. We're not talking about they expect you to play great solos. They expect you to be invested. They expect for you to look like you want to be there, right? From the way you dress to your attitude, everything. Because one of the great lessons that they left with us is that, the bandstand is sacred. It's sacred. You got to earn the right to be there. So I because of that, I've had issues over the years of just a variety of issues over the years in terms of certain things, and I just can't deal with it, and it's like, but the bandstand is a very, very special place. And if you had an opportunity to see Art Blakey play in his last days when he had cancer, and his road manager would have to pick him up and put him on the seat because he was so weak. Then once he started playing, it was like he was 17 years old. That changes your life. You'd be like, wow. That's how much the music meant to him. And so we have an obligation to really try to contribute to what it is that they've created for us. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Really appreciate that. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yoshi. Yeah. I mean that's all also true, guys. And I mean, to everyone that's listening, it is that passion and spirituality and that love, and you have to have it. Missing one of those and is something missing, and something's vital that's missing, We have 10 minutes left or 9 minutes left. And so Rachel, I think there's probably one more question on there. We'll take one more question and then we're gonna wrap it up. We'll do a brief question. Is there another one on there, Rachel? Okay. One last question from someone in the gallery.
Jaden has a question, I think.
Okay, Jaden.
Hey, I'm a bass student. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate hearing from y'all. My question is how do you go about developing your own sound while because you're listening to all these greats from the past, but how do you go about combining what you're hearing from them and developing your own sound and making it unique?
Here's something I find personally. I want to qualify and preface that I've never ever had a personal objective to try to become an innovator. And that is not for me to say that I think that that is wrong for someone to do. It's a matter of your personal bent, your personal leanings. For myself as an individual, I've always wanted to have an authentic sound and an authentic feeling, and authentic is a subjective term. For me, I have certain heroes. Some of my favorite pianists would include Art Tatum, Teddy Wilson, Nat King Cole, Errol Garner, Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, Hank Jones, Tommy Flanagan, Oscar Peterson, Ahmad Jamal, Horace Silver, Red Garland, Bobby Timmons, Sonny Clark, Cedar Walton, Kenny Drew, McCoy Tyner, Herbie Hancock, James Williams, Donald Brown, Mulgrew Miller, Kenny Barron. Did I say Cedar Walton? But I have many, many favorites. And I'm not just name dropping. I try to get all the recordings I can by these people, and not just from a certain period. I like to listen to the whole sweep of their recording career, hear how they developed, trace who I hear as their influences. Because a lot of these people are departed. I can't ask them. I can just listen and be curious and investigate. And for myself, the way I play is an embrace of some of my favorite players. What I find is we are in service. We're in service of the songs we play. We're in service of the band leaders we play for. We're in service of the musicians we play with. And we're certainly in service, as I see it, of our listeners. I am not a selfish performer. It does matter to me that my music connects emotionally and energetically with my listeners and with the people on the bandstand. What I find is if you play over time with a variety of band leaders and you always come to serve the band, as I said earlier, different band leaders have certain things that they want and certain things they don't want. A strong band leader is very specific about that. It's not wishy-washy. It's not, oh, what do you want to do as a side player? Like Professor Allen was saying, they're not asking you what songs you want to play. They have a sound. It's been established. If you come to every band you play with an attitude of serving the band leader, and you have your sense of your favorite players and you study them, and you keep staying in the spirit of service, your sound, your style, it will manifest.
Yeah, I agree. You know, when I hear that question, my first response is, with all due respect, why is that important? And I say that only because I've encountered, and it has nothing to do with you, I've encountered so many people who ask that question that are really kind of looking for a shortcut. You know, it's like, and I say, most of the people, well, in my opinion, a lot of people that we see them as having their own sound, you can still trace back their influences. As innovative and as creative as Tony Williams was, you can hear Art Blakey, Roy Haynes, Max Roach's influence on his playing. So I just think that if you are constantly searching, constantly working, your sound will naturally evolve. And sometimes other people will recognize it before you do. You know, sometimes people will say, well, man, I knew it was you because you do a certain thing. And you're like, oh, well, I didn't know I did that. Right? Because people are listening. People are paying attention. So I'm saying all of this to say just to continue to explore and just continue to explore, because the sound that we know of Coltrane's sound, he didn't really have that sound until he was in his early 30s. Right? If you listen to his first recording, which I think was 1951, He sounded like Earl Bostic, you know, a little Coleman Hawkins. I mean, it wasn't like the Coltrane that we hear and think about, you know, from, you know, My Favorite Things or Love Supreme or whatever. It's completely different. But there was an evolution, and that evolution came because he kept working. He kept trying to hear and trying to figure out what it was he was hearing to get to that, right? So the other question that you have to ask yourself as a bass player is that what's important to you, right? I mean, I think about, we have a mutual friend. His name is Peter Washington. Peter Washington was everybody's favorite sideman bass player. Still. And never had any aspirations to be a leader, you know. And of course, over the 30 plus years that I've known him, you know, you hear his growth, but you can still listen to him and hear Doug Watkins. You can hear some Paul Chambers. You can hear some Leroy Vinegar. You can hear different influences. But if I were to ask, or any of us were to ask him that question, you know, similar question, I don't think his response will be, yeah, I'm just trying to get my own sound. And again, that's not to discourage you for trying to do that. I'm just saying, you got to understand it's a process, you know?
Well, that's cool. Gentlemen, we want to thank Dr. Carl Allen and Dr. Benny Green. Please let's give them a big applause. And we certainly appreciate you guys being a part of this 2021 Dr. Billy Taylor Jazz Festival. And the next phase of this is, once all of this stuff is done, to get you guys here in person. And so, you know, maybe we had 12 months of this COVID thing up to this point. So maybe in the next 12, you know, let's make a date a year from tonight to have you guys in Greenville, North Kakalaki with us in person, you know. And you know, that's you know, and one of the things that the three of us have kind of talked about. I know Benny and I have been talking about this for 3 years, and hopefully we can get this together. Is that we're brainstorming now and getting ready to brainstorm about a trio record, and you know, so that's something that I know I'm looking forward to. You know, I always say, you got to put up with this old dude from the woods down here trying to find the B flat. So
I love the way you find it, Carol DeShiel.
Man, well, it's a mutual thing, man. You know, I'm looking forward to it, man. That's so we're gonna hope to do this, like I said, in person next year. And I want to thank all of the participants of the discussion today. And I thought it was good to, you know, in academia, we always have a tendency to do everything so formal, but I thought it was cool. Is, you know, maybe we call it the beginnings of the virtual jazz hang, you know, where we just talk, you know, about things. And, you know, and I think that's so important, because I think that is something I know both you and Benny said, you know, that is something that is missing, is that fellowship from the hang. You know, the clubs are, you know, I remember many a nights, you know, Bradley's The Sun coming up, you know, and we all still sitting here, you know. And so, you know, hopefully this is the beginning of a new era of the jazz hang. And so thank you to everybody that has participated. I want to send a special thank you out to our graduate teaching assistants, Andrew Falakara and Rachel Howard, for being administrators of this, and couldn't do anything without Alex Davis, our technical guru. We certainly appreciate that. All of the jazz faculty that tuned in. I know I saw Dan Davis there. Jeffrey Baer was on. Saw him somewhere. And so we just want to thank everybody. We're going to take a break now and hope everybody will come back to the live stream at 8 o'clock and watch the concert. The ECU Jazz Ensemble A, the ECU Dr. Billy Taylor combo, the ECU Maceo Parker combo, the ECU John Coltrane combo, and Mr. Sean, what's his last name, students? Oh man, y'all failed again. I gave you another time. Oh, Jones. Okay, Mr. Sean Jones. We got Sean Jones, and then we always close the festival with Dr. Taylor's "I Wish I Knew How I'd Feel to Be Free," and so we'll close out with that on the concert at 8. So again, thank you everybody. Please stay safe, take care, and we'll see you next time. And I'm gonna get the guest artists and the grad TAs and Alex to stay on just for a sec. And love you, as Duke Ellington would say, love you madly. Peace. Stay safe, guys.